Welcome to tonight's Shiur. Tonight is Motzei Shabbos, Parshas Chayei Soroh. I'm in a different location, so background. On the way here, actually in Edgware, on the way here, I heard about this Ingeman who in Abu Dhabi, who we don't know his whereabouts, and I would like to start off. First of all, dedicate tonight's Limud HaTorah in his Chus, and we should start with a Kapitel Chof in Chus of Tzvi HaKoyen Ben Etel. So please join me in saying a Kapitel Tilim. I'm not saying David Ya'ancha Adonai B'Yom Soroh Yisagem Choshem Elehei Yaakov Yishlach Ezra HaMikodesh Umitzion Yisadecho Yizkir Kol Mitchesecha V'Los Chaydash Nishelach Yitem Chachol Vecha Soskei Male, the Nanan of Yishuasecha, Shem Lehim, the Male, and the Nekol Secha, Atu Yadati, Kahishi, and Nevishichoi, Yaneo Mishne Koche, Bikuris, Yeshe Minoi, Ela Vorechev, Ela Vasusim, Vanachnu, Beshem, Alinoi, Leheim, and Nazkir, Ema Koro, Vanafolo, Vanachnu, Kamno, Vanis, Eidod, Alinoi Yeshua, Hamelach Yanenu, Vim Kareno. There is a help we should see Yeshua, Tev Hanir Ranigla. So, going on to our Seder Hayom, we're going to start off with the Shiur of Rambam, because tonight we finish off Sefer Torah, and we go on to Sefer Nezikin. The man in Lugano, Shliach, was very fakocht. Rebbe used to encourage the next Shiur of Rambams very often. And so he encourages, every Siyum of a Sefer, he has someone to make a Siyum, one that goes online. So he asked me to include this, was definitely a Dover Nochoin. So at the end of Hilchas Sefer Torah, the Rambam says it's Dover Borer V'Golim. Tumas V'Ataris, the idea of Tum and Torah, Gzeres HaKosovhe. They are things which are beyond our understanding. They are decrees of the Eibishter. They're not logical conclusions. Therefore, they would fall into the rubric of statutes, of chukim. The fact that you tovel and you immerse in water and then you get cleared of your cleanse of your tumah is also michlal chukim hu, is also in the same level of chukah. Tumah is neither dirt or excrement. We should be washed away with water. It's a decree of Hashem, the Torah, and the issue is something more of the focus of their heart. And therefore, Chachamim say, if there was Tevila without a mental intention to be Tovel, that doesn't count. There's also, however, a remez in this. A person does have in mind to be purified. In Toivels, he's purified. Even though physically nothing's changed. One who focuses his mind, his heart, to purify himself from the impurities of the souls, which are crooked thoughts and evil mindsets. Once the person has resolved in his heart to leave go and to go away from those plots, those schemes, and then he's decided and he's brought himself into the water of purity. So then I think the Rebbe used to talk about Memeham Das Toher. As Zakir says twice the word. When he comes to Das Toher, he resolves to go to focus in a pure way of attitude, etc. Then he becomes Toher. Indeed, it says in the pasuk, I will pour upon you pure water. Or Tahartem, and you will become purified from all your impurities. From all your dirt, whatever, Atar Eskar, purify you. Hashem berachamo, may Hashem in His mercy, berachamo Rabbim is abundant mercy. Kol chet ve'ovein ve'ashma, from all sin and guilt. Yetaharenu should purify us. Amen. And it finishes up at the end of Hilchos Mikvos, and it tells the number. That's number 10, volume number 10 of the Rambam of the Sefer Hayad, and it's got 144 problems. Okay, since we are already focusing on the Rambam, I'm going to go down to the question number 6 on the list of questions. I'm just going to mute everyone. Yeah, sorry. Mute. Yeah. Okay. Can you hear me? Motion, yes? Yeah, can you hear me? Good. Okay. Because I know I'm coming up as Chaim, so therefore I'm not sure whether you could hear me. Okay, so here in the beginning of Hilchos Mikvos, the first chapter of Hilchos Mikvos, so we have the halacha that if a person jumps into the mikvah, that's is not appropriate, and also if a person tovels twice is not appropriate. So someone in America who often asks me questions about this kind of question, he asked me, why do we not follow this? Why are we not following this ruling in the Rambam, which is that you shouldn't tovel twice? And the question is a very good one, because it's not only Tevilas Anoshim, which is purely on the voluntary level, it's also on Tevilas Noshim, there's also toveling twice, and the Rambam twice or more, at least by Ashkenazim. So don't we follow what the Rambam says? It's inappropriate to tovel twice. So the Rambam's source is actually Tosefta. It's also brought in Shulchan Aruch. Now, Siman Reish Aleph is one of the larger Simonim in Shulchan Aruch, in Yeridea, and you have it on the screen. So, Siman Reish Aleph, Seif Samach Beis. Mikvah sheyesh b'arboim somasum somos. If it's a mikvah which just got exactly 40 saw, lo yikpeitz lo toichai. Don't jump into such a tiny mikvah, because shelo yachsru hamayim b'kvitzose b'seichai. So jumping to the mikvah, that's not the main problem. The problem is if it's just got the bare minimum amount of water. So by jumping in, you'll cause water to jump out, and then you don't have a kosher mikvah. And similarly, you should not tovel twice, one after the other. So it's got to do. So this the way the Mechaber, the way the Yosef Karo understands this, based upon, I believe it's the Rivosh Yitzchok ben Sheshes, who was perhaps 100, 200 years before him, one of the later Rishonim. So he understands that this has got to do with a small mikvah, and that's why there's an objection to jumping to toveling twice. And here you have on the screen from the Taz on the spot in Yeridea. First, the tovel the first time, he's saying he doesn't. Well, I'm going to do it again. So the first time is not so important. The second one, by then there will be some water missing. But tovel pam achas, if tovel only once, you'll be careful to tovel properly. So the understanding here is that the objection to toveling twice is talking about a very small mikvah, just bare minimum size. And that you can see now. So now, going down, we have here a copy from a sefer called Gulois Ilios. I think I may have mentioned it in the past. Gulois Ilios is written by a Mechaber Rav Lifshitz, who was, I heard he was a Talmud of Tzemach Tzedek. And brilliant Mechaber, Rabbi Hertz, Zoya Habna Refuah Shleima, once told me that when he was learning Hilchos Mikvos, Borchu and Geman, and he went into Yechidus, the Rebbe told him to learn it also with the Gulos Ilias. By the way, it's an unusual name, Gulos Ilias. So the name comes from, there's somewhere in Sefer Shoftim, is it, where he says, was complaining, to my brother you gave the upper pools, and to me you gave the lower pools. Lochi nosato Gulos Ilios, veli nosato Gulois Tachtios. So the word gula means a pool, and his sefer is on mikvahs, so he called his sefer gulois ilios. Okay? So I'm not just saying golos in Polish pronunciation. That's the name of the sefer, gulois ilios. Okay, so he comments on this halacha about the Tosefta, etc., and he brings the Rambam, and he says the Rambam doesn't say anything. He's talking about a mini mikvah, a minimal size mikvah. So then he brings the Rivosh, and then he goes on, and this is so interesting how he connects Tatovel Pamayim, you see on the second column, to Ha'oime Shema. It says Ha'oime Shema Shema. It says in Gemara Brachos, the person says Shema Shema is also Meshatkin Oistoi. We tell him to be silent. And then it says, if you say Shema twice, is Megune. So the discussion in the Gemara about saying Shema twice, which incidentally is the reason why our minig is by Musaf, by Keser, the Chazan doesn't say Shema after the Tzibur. Why we take out the Sefer Torah, the Chazan says Shema, and we say after the Chazan. But for the Chazan to say Shema after everyone falls into the question of Shema Pamayim. And because of this, is Minik Chabad, the Chazan says the two words of Shema Yisrael quietly along with the Tzibur, and then he starts off Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, and then Who Elokeinu starts singing Minik Chabad in the last 50 years. Okay, so now, so he connects what's the problem with saying Shema Shema, and he says a similar idea that Areze Megune, if he repeats the Shema, because the first time he will rely on the second time he will rely on the first time. So he kind of connects the Pamayim Tvila to the Pamayim Shema, which is interesting. But meanwhile, he comes back, and I've cut out a lot of it. He comes back, and he says that the Balkari should toivel just once. You can see the last keta, the last quote here. Agam sheyesh soidei dvorim b'tvilas kama pa'amim v'zeu lekovet Shabbos v'yom. There is a union of toiveling multiple times, lekovet Shabbos v'yom. But b'tvila, the tefillah, when you're toiveling for davening, it's better to toivel once. Now, then he takes the famous word from the Baal Shem Tov, Kabbalah from the Baal Shem Tov. A person who toivels l'kiryo, he toivels even if it's very cold. The Baal Shem Tov says, I take achrayis that if he toivels once, he won't get harmed from that tevilah. But I don't take achrayis for more than that. That's the well-known tradition. So the Gulas Ilyas, he wants to say this, that the Baal Shem Tov means they only have to, they should only toivel once. The Poil, no one follows this, yeah? Someone told me that in Brunois, so Solneach, when he went to the mikvah, he said, he would tell the Bochrim not to hang around, but I don't know whether that was because of any Kabbalah or Halocho. Perhaps it was just, more a discipline thing. But meanwhile, so you have here very interesting, that's why I wanted to share it with you. We have here the Rambam talks about not toiveling twice, and we have this, and in other words, once is the right thing. Then we have here the Gulas Ilyas who's suggesting that should be followed. And he's understanding that's the pshat in the hero of the Baal Shem Tov. And I say, now, let's go to the next screen, and we'll just go a little bit more about that. So this is a letter to, what it is now, sorry. It's a letter of the Rebbe to someone who said that I heard in my name that on Friday you should toivel 5 times. And he's asking, I found a place where it says you toivel twice, 3 times, 4 times, 13 times, 14 times. I love to ask about Friday, but he never found anywhere it should say toivel 5 times. So the Rebbe first says, I don't know the basis of your shmua, of what you heard, where you heard this from. And although there is a mocker, this is brilliant, there's a mocker for 5 tevilas. And he quotes the Pri Ha'oretz from Mendel Vitebsker. It brings such a thing in the name of Rebbe Avraham, the son of Avraham HaMalach, obviously, in the name of the son of the Mazit Shemagid. And then the Rebbe says that there's the Kohen Gadol tables 5 times on Yom Kippur. And then you take a look at Mishnah. It talks about 5 levels in Tevila. Chulin, Meiser, Masasheni, Matrum, Vakodesh, and Mekporo. So you have 5 levels in Torah. Just by the way, just comes to mind now. There is the publisher Rabbi Weinfeld of Eschkel. Last 20 years, he's published under the title Shaila Moira. So he published a sefer, I have the sefer at home, called Mapas HaTorah. And it's got a fascinating chart of the hierarchy of Torah. And then he gave it into the Rebbe. And the Rebbe said, you've missed out a whole category. The whole category of Poras Chatos, of the water for the Pora Adumo, he had missed out that whole category. Of course, by the next print, he included that. But the level from Yechida, he says, the 5th Madrege, the Rebbe was sensitive to. So the Rebbe gives a reference to a source for 5 Tvilas, and he also gives a beautiful Rimazim for 5 Tvilas. But mi anila hachriya ben kol adeyas hamuris. Who am I to arbitrate? Then he gives a reference to the Alter Rebbe in Erev Yom Kippur. But Balkari should table once, but it's tshuva 3 times. And then Shalom has opinion of 14 or 39. So fascinating. The Rebbe has a whole list of different things of cheshbenos. The Rebbe does not give anything definitive. Ad kan. I want to add a couple of things. One is that Ma'izei Olav Shalom, Dayan Yosef Raskin. So he told me that he was once in the mikveh Leningrad, and the Rebbe Rayat, the Frierike Rebbe, was there, and whereas everyone ran away, but he stood at a distance just to see how many tvilas, and he remembered that the Rebbe tabled either 3, 3, and 7, or 3, 4, and 7. I showed him this letter where the Rebbe talks about the Soroh of Yud Gimel or Yud Dalet. He was more noted that it was 3, 3, and 7. That's one thing. So last night I talked about this in the Shul, and so Rabbi Yosef Lando tells me the following. 2 things. He heard, Rabbi Binyamin Klein told him, he heard, he said B'Shem the Rebbe, which is, I find very interesting, because Rabbi Binyamin was a Baal Soid. But Rabbi Binyamin said, Mr. Ahmed, this is something he felt he should be telling people. The Rebbe once said, Avenike be 9 more is garnished. Less than 9 times it doesn't count. First time I heard this. And then he told me another thing that I'm mentioning this because in my mind there's a Messiah there, talking about Rabbi Yankov Lando, Rabbi Yosef Lando, and Rabbi Yosef. So before he went to Yechidus with his father, so his father took him to mikveh. He said, I'm going to show you how you should, he has a Kabbalah, how you toivel before going to mikveh, going to mikveh before Yechidus, and it should be 3, 3, and 3. That's what I heard from him last night. All right, so we have our various Messiahs, and there's also written up about toivel Kerogil, then Kedag, and then again Kerogil. Someone wrote up an article, the 9 tvilas of regular Kadag, and it's similar to Tarat. Okay, but that's enough for tonight from the Dem Inyan. Let's go. This is all Bekesha to the Limud Rambam, which we learned this past week. So the Rambam, to summarize, the Rambam does talk about toiveling only once, and the poskim, the various ways in the poskim to say why it's okay to toivel more than once, and indeed that is the prevailing minute. Okay, let's come back to question number 1, and that is about the Borchu at the end of Maariv on Friday night. So here is a difference between Chabad and practically any other circle. And that is, in many other shuls, at the end of Shachris, the end of Maariv, someone will make a Borchu, in case someone had missed Borchu before. So then you make a Borchu now, to be a Motzi. In Chabad, that kind of, oh, hello, I've come late. Everyone should know I come late. I don't want to miss anything, so I'm going to make a Hecha Borchu. It's somehow because it's not popular in Chabad. On the other hand, on Friday night is a standard thing in our Siddur to say Borchu, Kaddish and Borchu. And it's also, the person who asked me this is actually writing a whole volume on Tefillah. He's published one volume on Tefillas HaChoil, the Mekoros HaTefillah, and we're now working on his Shabbos volume. And so he's asking, and he sees in Nusach Chabad, they say Friday night, or even on the weekday also, to say after Kaddish Sholem, to say a Mizmer, and then to say a Kaddish Yosem, and then Borchu. And that's not the way we do it. We do a Kaddish, but a Chatzi Kaddish, and then Borchu. So let's just discuss that a little bit. By the Sfardim, there is no Kaddish after Aleinu. And the Kaddish, the Rabbanon, which we say after Kaveh, in Chisvi Arizal is referred to as Kadisha de Yasme, the orphan's Kaddish, because that's the last Kaddish in the Sfardish Minig. And so for Maariv, they don't have a Kaddish after Aleinu. So they say an extra mizmer. After the Chazan has said Kaddish Tiskabel, so then they say another mizmer to enable the Yosem to say Kaddish. That's why it's a Kaddish Yosem. Then the Borchu is to make up for the past, for if someone came late. But they're kind of not connected. In our minig, we don't have such a thing. In Chabad, we don't have a seder of doing a Kaddish Sholem and then a Borchu. It's again, we see in the Polish Welt, they say Kaddish, and then say B'hurachim, then Borchu. And by us, as I say, that the Kaddish and Borchu follow one after the other. And I'm sure I mentioned this before, the B'chot Rov, who was a contemporary of the Alter Rebbe, he says, a bit younger, so he says he saw the Alter Rebbe's Siddur, such a Seder, that by Maariv, like by Shachris, that Borchu comes straight after Kaddish. He says, I liked it and I introduced it in my place also. Okay, now let's come back. Friday night, Borchu, the second Borchu. So here we have a letter of the Rebbe responding to a question about this. And the Rebbe says, the source is Kabbalah. He doesn't bring in the Siddur to say it Borchu every day after Shachris. He only brings the Borchu Hashem of Friday night. And never have we seen this in the Beis Rebbe, Beis Harav, to say Borchu after davening on a regular basis, is this. Gam Amiras Borchu Hasheni, the Kabbalah's Shabbos, he Alpi Kabbalah. The second Borchu, which we say Friday night, is Alpi Kabbalah, gives us a reference to the Shara Koil. So since the Olam on Motzei Shabbos likes to hear a little bit of Kabbalah, so therefore I'm put on the screen from the Pri-Eitz Chaim. So if you love gematrias, so here we go. Inyan, on the right column. The left one is from Shara Kavonis, also from Reb Chaim Vital. On the left column, he says the idea of Neshama Yisera. And if you didn't get your Neshama Yisera by the first Borchu, if you didn't get the Ruach of the Neshama Yisera by the first Borchu, so then be Mechaven the second Borchu. That's from the Shara Kavonis. But let's focus now on the Pri-Eitz Chaim. Inyan Beis Tomim Borchu Shalel Shabbos. The first Borchu, the Kabel Toisvus Soid Ruach. You have the Neshama Yisera, and you've got Nefesh Ruach and Neshama. So at this point is the point of to accept, to receive the Ruach, the additional Ruach of the Neshama Yisera. Now, the Yichaven, you should have in mind that Shem Havaya is Oile Chovvo. Shem Havaya is 24. Now, V'charkach beribua hu ayin base. Then Yud Kei Vav Kei will work out to be 72. Now, let's keep track. If it's got Yud, then Yud and Hey, and then Yud Kei Vav, and then Yud Kei Vav Kei. So let's keep track. That's 10, and then another Yud Kei is 15, that's 25. Then Yud Kei Vav is 21. So 21, 25 equals 46. Then Yud Kei Vav Kei is 26. So 46 and 26 even plus equals 72. So that's the first one. That's the easy part.
It went off,
Pardon?
It went off. No, I didn't turn it off, but it went off.
Can't hear? Can you not hear? Mendel, you can hear? Very second.
You're okay.
Thank you. So that's the ribua. That's Yud Kei Vav Kei beribua, and in other words, build up. Yud Kei Vav Kei is 72. Now, v'achakach b'milui haribua, that's going to be 130. Now that's a little bit more challenging. Milui haribua, that means like this: the Yud has got a Vav Dalet, and the Hey has got Aleph, and the Vav has got a Aleph Vav, and something on those lines. Then b'milui haribua. So you're going to take those letters and then fill them in. And so the infill brings you to 130. Okay. So now we've got 3 levels. We've got 26. And then you've built it up to 72. And then with the milui haribua, you take the miluyim of those letters of the 72, and we're going to bring you to 130. So now take 26 and 72 and 130. That's going to bring you to 228. That's one cheshbon. That's one Borchu. Second Borchu. So you're going to have in mind the miluyim of. Now we've got the Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei can be spelt in 4 forms. It can be spelt with Alephs, and that would be Hey Aleph, Vov Aleph Vov, and Hey Aleph, and that's called Milui Alfin. That will bring a total of 45. Then we've got another way of filling it with doubles, Hey Vov Vov. So that'd be 20 and 32. That will be 52. That's Shem Ban. And then you have that's what's relevant. And then there's another way of filling it up to reach to 63. And there's another way if it's all Vovs. Hey Yud, Vov Yud Vov, and Hey Yud. That will bring you together with the Yud, which is 20, Yud Vav Dalet, so it brings you to 72. So we have here 3 Techaven Legimel Meluyim of Ab, Sag, and Ma. And of these, take the Miluy of those letters, and that's going to give you 102. So again, let's look at that carefully. Ab is 72 and 63 and 45, but that's not what we're talking about. That will not bring you to 180. We're talking about the miluyim of those letters, and that brings you to 102. And then 3 times membase, which brings you to 126. So 102 and 126 brings you again to the Gematria Borchu. So this is typical stuff in Kisvi Arizal. And so you have here a whole cheshbon and kapikabola of the Gematria Borchu. So he's given one kavona for the first Borchu and another kavona for the second Borchu. Then he shows that Mevoirach is also the same thing of, okay, so that's enough for the moment. Let's go on. Meanwhile, this is what the Rebbe said here, that the second Borchu is Al Pi Kabbalah. So simply, on a simple level, well, we're going to the whole Gematria on the simple level, that's Al Pi Kabbalah, because it's an Indian of Friday night, you want to be Makabel, the Neshama Yeseda, and that comes in stages. Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama. By the way, Nishmas Kol Chai on Shabbos morning is Kabbalah's of the Neshama of the Neshama Yeseda, and Friday night you've got the Nefesh and the Ruach. And if you didn't manage by the first Baruch, so you got the second chance by the second Baruch. Okay, let's move on. So now here's a, let's say, down-to-earth question. So here is a question of a Ingeman in somewhere in South America, and he was invited to farbreng at another Shul, which he did. And then afterwards, after Shabbos, the Gabbai of the Shul offers him 50,000 pesos. Now, in case you get too carried away, that's about $50. Okay. So but he's saying, it's Shabbos, so I'm allowed to accept money for. The Gabbai says, I want to give you this money because next time I want you to come again. Yeah, when I want to invite you. He says, Schar Shabbos. So here you see on the screen, the dinim of Schar Shabbos are discussed in Shulchan Aruch Sin and Shi and Vov, and you have from the Mishnah Berurah that you're not allowed to accept payment for your efforts on Shabbos, nothing to do with Malacha, just for your time and effort on Shabbos. If it's given to you as a gift. So we have to be careful with this. When is it a gift and when is it considered a wage? So if you agree a fee at the outset, then that's considered a wage. But if someone gives you, after you've done them a favor, a big favor, and they give you a gift, they give you but it wasn't agreed at the outset, that would be considered a matana, that's okay. So here we see on the second column that this is from Pesukei Chuvas. You can see that when sometimes the neighbor asks you, a babysitter, or he says, Darshonim, Chazonim, that they're coming and helping out. After Shabbos, you give them a tip, you give them a pras. That's not a chashash because there wasn't an agreed fee. This is something okay, fine. They're given something as a thank you, but not as a wage. Before going further, I read a very cute quote from Rebbe Adin Steinsaltz Alav Shalom. He was giving a talk to a group of budding rabbonim, and he said, "Der Welt sagt, as Chazonim naseinen naronim." They don't say it about rabbonim yet. Please keep it that way. Okay, let's move on. Here's a very interesting question. We have a inyan of when the Chazan says, and then we all respond, Hashem Hashem Keil Rachum V'Chanun. So you have on the screen, this is from Siman Tov Kuf Samach Hey in Hilchos Tanis, where in the Slichus, etc., there is we invoke the 13 Midos of Rachamim, and the famous idea how the Rebbe brings it actually in the Ha'oras at the end of the Slichus. The Minhagim there at the back of the Slichus, at the back of the Slichus, the Medrash that the Eibishter enclosed himself with a talus, and he showed to Moshe Rabbeinu the derech, how a chazan will daven, and the chazan will invoke the Yud Gimel Midas, and they will be listened to. So there's idea of the chazan saying in calling together, and the olam say Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim. So it says that this says in the Shulchan Aruch that a yochid should not be saying Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim. Derech tfilo v'akoshos rachamim. As invoking Hashem's mercy, that's not the right thing to do on your own. It's something dafke b'tzid. The dover shebekdusha got a status of something which is a dover shebekdusha. So he seems to compare it to Borchu and Kaddish and etc., which you need to have a minyan. If you just want to just recite them as reciting psukim, that is oyimram. That's okay. I'm not going to go. That's another whole discussion. Where in the Siddur it says you don't say it, and yours truly feels that you should say it, but that's not the discussion for now. Meanwhile, here's the question. I'm behind the minyan, and I'm holding Pesukei deZimra, or for that matter, I'm in Birchas Krishma, and the Chazan is leading the Tzibur in saying, Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim. Should I be mafsik, in middle of Ashrei, in middle of Avas Olam, to say Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim? That's the question. So we have a very good sefer on the rules of Hefsik B'Tfilah by Harav Lemberg from Kfar Chabad, I believe, and he gives us a reference to this. He says, no, you should not respond. And he gives a reference to the sefer Tehillah LeDavid, David Urtenburg, who was a Rav in Barditchev about 150 years ago, Koch sich starke, the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch. And he says, according to, that you have on the screen now, according to what it says in Siman Tov Kuf Samach Hey, that Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim is a dover shebekdusha, unless it's said in a Kroya B'Torah. If so, you should be allowed to mafsik in the middle of Birchas Krishma to respond. That's how, he hasn't seen that happening as on a regular basis. So he goes into, he has a couple of points here, but then he gives another interesting svara. Oid ef shaloimar. He quotes what I mentioned of this medrash before. It's Gemara in Rosh Hashanah. Melamed shenis'atif HaKadosh Baruch Hu shliach tzibur. Kivyochel the Eibishter enwraps himself with a talus like a chazan. V'hera lo Moshe seder tefillah. So you look at what he says here. Nira de'iker hu shehashatz oime yud gimel midas ba'asara. The original practice would be that the chazan said yud gimel midas in the presence of 10 people. It's not imperative that the tzibur should respond and stay along with him. So he's bringing a very interesting thing, that whereas other dvarim shebekdusha, it's incumbent upon the kohol to say their bit, and the chazan is calling them to say, but here it really should have been the chazan. So, and therefore he says that's not a chiyuv to answer. I want to answer, but that's not a chiyuv. And once it's not a chiyuv, just on minhag, you're not mafsik in Pesukei deZimra, and certainly not Birchas Krishma. Things which are a din to answer, those you're mafsik in Pesukei deZimra. If it's Davar Shebekdusha, you're mafsik in Birchas Krishma. But if it's on the level of minhag, like Borchu Shmoy, saying Brich Shmei, etc., those things on the level of minhag, and therefore you would not interrupt the middle of Pesukei deZimra to respond. So at any rate, that's his response. I just find it very, very interesting how we have an original, according to him, the original thing is that Chazan says it aloud, and the tzibur just listen. The fact that the tzibur also say it is okay, but that the tzibur and the Chazan, that the Chazan's amira has been kind of dropped. He just says it along with the tzibur. That's like very interesting. That such a thing should have. If that's how it should have been, why was that dropped? Why is it not that the tzibur said after the chazan? So I don't know the answer to that. Meanwhile, we do have a psak here, at least that the minig is not true. Yeah, right. So now we have here a question of a Kohen who wants to train as a doctor. So what you have on the screen is from the Sefer Nishmas Avraham, which specializes in halacha and medicine, and in the training, usually the training for medicine would also involve work on a cadaver, on a body of a dead person, and obviously that is something which a Kohen is not allowed to do. And in the Nishmas Avraham, he brings a long quote from Reb Moshe Feinstein in Igros Moshe, really slamming anyone who wants to come with any heter for a Kohen to learn and to say it's pekuach nefesh, that he has to learn to be a doctor, be able to save lives. It doesn't mean that you have to be the one who has to know how to save lives, yeah? So a Kohen can't learn, if the training to be a doctor involves tumas mago, to touch a dead body, for sure he cannot train to be a doctor in that way. To be in a building, in a hospital, whatever, where there are dead bodies, also that's tumas oil. So there is Meikir Hadin, tumas oil doesn't apply to a goy. Adam kiyamas b'oil is afkayid. The minig is that koyanim avoid oil also from a goysha dead body, but min hadin it's not also for so then that might be some wiggle room, so to speak. So now, then there comes the next question, which I put on as question number 4. So I'm going to number 5. If he is a practicing doctor, and in his practice he's often involved with Mason, is he now? The student is asking, will he be deprived of the privileges of a Kohen? And the answer is yes, he will be deprived, because just like if a Kohen marries a divorced woman, so long as they are married, because he's violating the expectations, the halochos of Kehuna, so he forfeits. He is suspended from his Kehuna privileges. So the same thing would be if he is consciously, accepting to do roles which involve racing. So then he's not allowed to duchen. Certainly, you wouldn't give him the first aliyah l'Torah, because so long as if he resolves to avoid this, then he's back to. But meanwhile, so long as he's engaged, so then he's possible for avodas kehuna. Someone's asking, there are frum doctors who are koyanim. Perhaps there is another way of learning. Maybe I never trained. Perhaps there's a way of training without having to be involved with dead bodies. So then that would be okay. But yeah. So now just one more point on this. I had once a very interesting situation, which we have discussed in this shiur, where there was a pidyon haben, and this was from people who are very far from practicing Yiddishkeit, and they had a friend who was a Kohen, and what happened on the day we were making the party, it was 6 months after the baby was born. They made a party, and they're going to make a pidyon haben, and the fellow who was going to be the Kohen, he was out of town, but his brother, he's also a Kohen, so he stepped in. The brother was married to a shiksa. Married to a shiksa, well, that's also disqualifies a Kohen, like a grusha, a zoina. So is the pidyon haben a valid pidyon? So it's all very well to say he's suspended from the privileges of Kehuna, but does it mean that if he does a pidyon haben, that the pidyon, it doesn't count? So I was more noted to say it doesn't count, but the matzah it wasn't really practical to redo it. As I said, they were not so really involved. So so Rav Ari is putting on the screen on the chat. It appears that if a Kohen doctor has to see a mess to issue a certificate, maybe a heter due to mace mitzvah to avoid an autopsy. Okay, that's an interesting point. Okay, yeah. Let's move on. So we did this already. That's what we did also. So now I'm going to question number 7. So someone asked me, he's had some medical issues with a couple of his children, and because of this, he was bodik the mezuzahs in his house, and he gave them to a sofer who said that all of the mezuzahs are kosher, but by the way, some of them are one script and some of them are another. You have I confess. You asked me what's the difference between Alter Rebbe's Ksav and Arizal's Ksav and Bishos's Ksav. I'll tell you, I don't know. I've never really gone into it properly. And Baruch Hashem, there are people who are very capable and know about these things. But here's the question: in principle, is it correct to have in the same house to have different mezuzahs? Some of this Ksav and some of the other Ksav. I mean, how do you say? To sharpen the question, would it be okay to have in a pair of tefillin to have 4 parshas, 2 of Svardish Ksav and 2 are Arizal Ksav or 2 are Bishos Ksav, etc.? Would it be? So if you didn't have there are those who say all of the Ksavim, they are valid. That's certainly if you're stuck, you're going to follow that all of the Ksavim, all the various scripts they're not mutually exclusive. But on a more hidur level, so you say if this is the way you feel that's the right way to do it, so you shouldn't be at the same time doing something a different way. So this I looked around and I found this in a sefer called Sharei HaMezuzah. So I don't have the sefer, it's on, but I got it on Otzar Chochmah, and he quotes from a sefer Vayichi Yaakov, which I believe the Rov or Tzelem, or one of the Ongarish Rabbonim from the previous generation, and he says if you have mezuzahs, some of them are the way they write the alephs, etc., and some are Bes Yosef, it's better not to have them all in the same house, in your same property, because it's like a bit of a contradiction. Even though every doorway is another mitzvah, but you have got a chiyuv to have mezuzahs, and you're fulfilling it in different ways, and almost contradictory ways. And he says that the Sfas Emes also agreed with this guidance. So I'm not saying it's possible, chas v'sholem, but he's got a has medical problems, and he wants to be baidik mezuzah shavim muhuder. So I said that on the level of hidur, at least, it would be correct that they should all be the same. The place to, the first address to read about this is in the beginning of Siman Lamed Vav Nerechaim. In the Sharet Tshuva, he brings there already, that's the first discussion about this. But okay, so as a hidur, for sure, it's better that they should be consistent. Right, now, someone last Friday night in a Chabad house lifted the lid of the cholent and then put it back. So now, does that make the cholent cooked on Shabbos and therefore also? So there's a difference if it was mevushal kol tzorkoi or if it wasn't. If the cholent wasn't fully cooked, for whatever reason, and you put the lid on, so by putting the lid on, you've intensified the heat and cause it to cook, that would be reason to not be allowed to eat the cholent on Shabbos. But in the more common scenario, it's fully cooked, but there's just someone who's extra curious, put the lid back. So what's the problem of putting back the lid? So in the dinim in Yeredeya, about there's a drop of milk fell into a pot of food, of cooking meat. So there it talks, if you put the lid on, then that causes the movement of the food, and it's as if you're stirring the food. So then jumping from Yeredeya to Erechaim, so some are taking the view that by putting the lid on, it's as if you're stirring. Now stirring, if it's uncooked or semi-cooked, that's cooking. But if it's fully cooked, what's the issue of stirring? Nirakim avashal. So now, all right, so stirring fully cooked is nirakim avashal. So putting on a lid, so some want to say it's nirakim avashal. Okay, but you can see how it's kind of jump one to the next. So now let's take a look. What Rav Forkash has in his Sefer, the Shabbos Halocho, he's quite lenient, at least certainly when necessary. He writes, putting on the lid when the food is, or putting the lid back onto a pot, if it's fully cooked, although we said that you're not allowed to stir it, as I said, that's because of Nirakim Avashim, but you are allowed to put the lid back even as it's on the fire, even though after Be'ez Shahi Megula, when it was the lid was off, the pot, the food stopped bubbling. When you put it back, it's going to start bubbling. And he still says you are allowed to put the lid back. Certainly if it's a less active situation, that you would be allowed, as I said, it's fully cooked, and therefore it's a question of only, not a question of mavashal, question of nirakim mavashal, and he takes the view that putting a lid on is not called nirakim mavashal. If it's not fully cooked, then that's a different story, then that for sure is a problem. I once came to Manchester for a Shabbos, and the bocher in yeshiva, it was his job to prepare the food. There's a cook, but over Shabbos, the cook is with his family. So there's a bocher, it's his job to get the kitchen ready, get the food ready for Shabbos. And he got to Mifshoim, then whatever. He came half an hour before Shabbos, he realizes that the chicken soup is in the freezer. No. So he whips it out of the freezer, puts it on the big fire, top flame, and it comes ready, lichtzinnen and the shkia, and there's still ice floating the top. So he turned off the fire before Shabbos started, and the boys didn't have chicken soup. What would be really the halacha? The halacha would be that there's a blech, so he would have been allowed to leave it there, and in a couple of hours' time, this is the winter. In a couple of hours' time, the soup would have been hot. Or if anyone would lift the lid to peep whether the ice is still floating, then chas v'shalom, he mustn't put the lid back, because then that's hastening the bishul. But had they left the lid on a high flame for the next couple of for another 2 hours, whatever, the bocher might have been able to have hot soup. All right. What happened, yeah? Okay, let's move on. Someone's asking about drops from the steam falling back into the cholent. That's a good point. That's if the if you lift the lid long enough for the moisture in the lid to have cooled off, then you have a problem of the putting it back where the moisture drips back in. But if it's just for a couple of seconds, I don't think that's going to cool off so fast. Right. So now, just last week, someone asked me, he's making a chasana, as in he's officiating, and he's worried that there's the witnesses one of the witnesses is not able to write his name in Hebrew. So actually, I had this personally an experience. I was at a chasana of a relative in somewhere in South America, and everyone there, Kimat, was a mishpacha, either from the Tzad HaChosn or from the Tzad HaKal, so all possible Eidos. So who did they find as Eidos? There was one shliach in the next town, and then there was one Babal Tshuva, very fine person, hat, jacket, full beard, daven 3 times a day, but he couldn't write his name in Hebrew. So what they did was he made like a dot to dot, and to join the dots, and that's how he's able to write Avraham Ben, whatever it was. He actually also signed his name in Spanish. Now, I want to clarify this. Making a dot to dot or similar, or using a stencil, that's mentioned in Gemara Gittin, Nikarin. But there, the halacha is that's only for a get. It's not allowed for a ksuba. You buy a get, because we're concerned, we don't want to leave chas v'sholom a woman as an aguna. Therefore, if the only a witness you have is someone who can't write his name in Hebrew, so you make can make a stencil or whatever. But for a ksuba, it's not such a rush. And therefore, you aren't allowed to rely on that. You can't use a stencil or dot to dot for signature on a ksuba. But then he can write his name in English or in Spanish, yeah. And that you have here in Shulchan Ebno Ezer, Simin Kuf Lamed, that if a get is written in another language, then it says the Eidim can be in another language, that's okay. So then I said you can have the Eid sign his name in English. So this shliach, he asked me, what do you mean you can sign in English? Does it mean like he signs his check with a scribble, or does he write, Yosef ben Shimon? So, yeah, then someone's suggesting perhaps you should write his secular name. All right. So there's a volume in Hebrew. I can also have as my signature in Hebrew, but if I sign in a ksuba, I write my name and in a legible way. Yeah, my signature is not so legible. Yeah. So now you have there's a series of Sforim called Mishpat HaKsuva, and that's, I think, 8 volumes by Yom Baal Shalom. So I did a search there, and he writes the following. Yeah? So if he wrote 8 volumes, he probably knows what he's talking about Ksubas. He says, if a witness signs his name in Loazit, in a foreign language, so then he can sign his name either in Hebrew, you can write Yaakov ben Yitzchak, Eid, as you can see on the screen, all written Yaakov Ben, etc., and Eid, Eid, or you can write Jacob, the son of Isaac, witness. But he says, don't write Jacob, the son of Isaac, Eid, because you're mixing languages. If you say the son of, then you have to say witness, not Eid. In addition to the fact that Ed might actually sound like short for Eduardo, yeah. So so you can have, if necessary, yeah, not generally the case, but you have a witness to sign with English. He would write his full name and his father's name, and if your custom is also some Rabbonim nowadays also put a family name, so you'd also write the surname somehow. It has to be clear that the surname is not a personal name. Yeah, it has to be clarified. And if you write in Hebrew, you write lemishpachas. Right. One couple more things we have left. One is wait a minute. Okay, so someone asked me about taking sleeping tablets on Shabbos. So Rav Forkash, in his newest volume, which is Shabbos Halocho Volume Hey, deals with, one of his topics is about refuah, medicines. Now on Shabbos we don't take medicines for minor conditions. If it's a condition which the person would be bedridden, then he's allowed to take a medicine. And now, if he knows if he doesn't take the medicine, he'll be bedridden, he's also allowed to take medicine. So now, sleeping pills. So he says, Rav Forkash writes, if he's mitzstar me'oid, if he's extremely uncomfortable. And he explains like this. One way of saying, or looking at it is, sleeping pills don't heal any ailment. Can't sleep, that's one side. It's not refuah. Therefore, it shouldn't fall into the issue of taking different medicines. Then he goes the other extreme, that if a person cannot sleep, is an ois mensch. How do you say ois mensch in English? I don't know. But he just can't function, yeah? You don't sleep at night, and never mind the person himself, what about the people around him? So therefore, it's like a cholak kol gufay. So then you can take sleeping pills, so you should be able to be a mensch. So either way, he's got two heterim to be allowed. So normally, if it's not an extreme situation, the answer would be no, don't use sleeping pills. But if a person really needs them, otherwise they won't be able to function, then you would be allowed to take sleeping pills on Shabbos. Well, nowadays, there's a tendency to be more lenient about taking medicine on Shabbos because most of us are not competent enough to create our own medicines, and the whole reason for not taking medicine on Shabbos is that you might come to grind your own medicine. All right, just two more things to finish off with tonight. About using silk garments. It came in passing. I think it was got to do with the talus, but one of our listeners who listens to the recording, asked more details about this. So here we have a very early sichos of the Rebbe. You can see it's Soroh Menachem Gabbai, which means Tafshin Aleph, and he mentions that the Rebbe Rashab talks about this. Shabbos is connected to Olam Abriya, and Meshi, silk, comes from a living creature, and so you've got the various levels of Rebbe Tzil Briya Tzia, and Chai. You've got Dayan Sameach Chai Medaber. So Chai is on the level of Briya, and therefore Shabbos we would wear silk, which relates to Olam Abriya. So during the week you'd wear wool. Wool is tzumer shebachai, whereas meshi is more pnimi of the silkworm, whatever, and therefore it's considered chai. I once heard from Moshe Landau of Sholem that you see nowadays people wearing artificial silk. So he says, you go from wool on the weekday on Shabbos you're wearing a silk, so it's going from Tzemeach to Chai, or whatever, Tzemeach Shebachai to Chai. If you put on a artificial silk, you're going from Tzemeach down to Daimim. So actually you're Mahilu Chachomim B'Takanoso. But then I've heard this sefer, it's called Minagis Royal Torah. So he has in Siman Reish Samach Beis about Big Shabbos. So he quotes like this. He quotes from Rabbeinu Bechaya. How come in the Mishkan there was no use of silk in the fabrics for the Mishkan? And he says it's because it comes from a worm, and you have idea, you can only use for Avodas Hashem a kosher species. And for this reason, the Chassam Sofer asks the question, how can we use silk for things in the Shul, for various inyonim, mantalach, whatever? And he says that's only melechas shemayim mamish, let's say mamish for, like you wouldn't use for tefillin, etc. But he doesn't see a mila in using silk. Then he brings from the Triska Magid, who says that the reason why there's a Indian of using silk, because it comes from worms. And that will bring the person to anova v'shiflus, bring the person to humility, to feel seta brittle. And so it's very, very interesting how you have one extreme to the other. One's talking about this mile of Olam Abriya, and this one is saying it's bringing to shiflus. And you see he also quotes in this sefer, he quotes a Maimach Chassidus from the Rebbe Rashab, and he page Tov Ayin Beis. That doesn't help most of us because you have to tell us which year. Yeah, it's actually in Ayin Beis, where he talks about this. She said before the Rebbe. This is the mind which the Rebbe refers to in this letter. Where he talks about the meaning of Shabbos, Shechas to El Mabriya. One last thing, I told you last week that I was going to meet with a talus cotton manufacturer, which I did on Monday evening. And what it came out, someone's asked a very good question. So last Shoni, okay, good question. I have to leave it for next week. I was also running out of time. Now there are different manufacturers. This manufacturer showed me that his talis and katan do not have a huge opening, and the diameter is about 24 centimeters, perhaps less. And there's also a point that the shoulders should be wider than the aperture for the neck. Then there's another manufacturer, which I sent them a message on Thursday or Friday. I asked them, why do they have, and their hole is actually, must be about 50 centimeters or 40 centimeters, very long hole. And it's, so I don't know the reason why they do that. And if I do get an explanation from them, I'll share it with you in the future. Next Motzei Shabbos, I will be hopefully still Shabbosdik, because I'm intending to go for the Kinus HaShluchim, and therefore I'll be later do a recording before Shabbos and send you all a link to the pre-recorded Shiur. And meanwhile, I wish you all a good Shabbos, a good Avoch, and we should hear Besuras Tevis, especially about I mentioned the beginning of the Shiur, Tzvi HaKohen Ben Etul. Should hear Besuras Tevis, the Kohen Mamash. A good Avoch.
Good work.
Good work.
Good work.
I do so.